Welcome. This is NTA Tuesday Live, and I'm Cyril Stober. Now, funding education in Nigeria is a Herculean task with a wide range of support components from non-state actors, facilitating learning through massive investments in infrastructure and professional capacity. Now, the reality today is best understood from the figure allotted to the education sector in the 2021 budget, representing 5.6% of the annual budget of 13.08 billion naira. That's against the 26% recommended by UNESCO. Now, the 2021 Global Education Summit in London provided a platform for participating countries to support quality education with a firm declaration that no child will be left behind, and bringing stakeholders together to fashion ways of potentially increasing access to funding of global education systems in 90 countries for a period of 5 years on a budget of $5 billion. Well, hope is gradually being rekindled locally, with the Nigerian delegation led by President Buhari extracting promising commitments from the global engagement to improve education in the country, and a pledge by government to increase budget allocation to education by 50% within the next 2 years. Good news, bearing in mind the more than a decade-long assault on the education sector by insurgency, banditry, kidnapping, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight, our guests will be discussing funding systems and also review the fallout of the London Global Education Summit, but not before this background report by Oyeyemi Ajayi.
The Global Education Summit, which held on 28th and 29th July in London, United Kingdom, was co-hosted by the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. It brought together heads of states and governments, as well as officials and youth leaders, to provide a platform for partners to chart a way forward towards transforming education systems through the exchange of best practices. The goal is to raise at least $5 billion towards supporting efforts at transforming global education system for learning outcomes fit for 21st century. President Buhari's attendance corroborates his commitment, promises an assurance to give more emphasis to education, including the allocation of more resources to the sector under his administration. The president lent his voice to the Raise Your Hand campaign on closing the financial gap on education, described as the heart of all national development efforts. He also committed to raising the budget for education by 50% over the next 2 years and up to 100% by the year 2025. And this is aimed at improving learning outcome in the country.
Some child somewhere may well be the one who goes on to develop the next vaccine to deal with cancer or whatever other problem afflicts humanity. Some kid around the world will, I have absolutely no doubt, have their lives transformed, and many, many kids will have their lives transformed by these funds.
Let us remember that even though money is necessary for transforming our education systems, it alone is not sufficient. A deliberate, committed drive towards ensuring that each dollar investment impacts quality and holistic education for our children is equally as vital.
Over 200 million. The size of the country itself is a major challenge for any administration.
Absolutely.
But luckily, people have realized that education is a starting point.
Yes.
Anybody who missed the opportunity of receiving education, he has missed everything. Hence, the fight for opportunities for education is very, very severe.
Deliberations at the summit includes the power of education transforming education for girls, financing for impact and recovery, as well as the priorities for transforming education. The president said Nigerians are completely aware of the priority of education, hence they are making necessary savings and inputs to make sure their children and wards get opportunities to quality education, while affirming that anybody who misses education misses everything. There are expectations that the president's commitment at the summit should be translated into political will and action for the critical situation of education in Nigeria. How fast can the take-homes from this summit be translated and implemented to improve the education sector? Also, how effective will the 50% increment of the education budget be? These are among issues guests will be discussing now.
That background report sets the tone for tonight's discussion. Let me introduce our guests to you. I'd like to welcome to this program the Honorable Chukwuemeka Wajuba. He is Minister of State Education. He's a former member of the House of Representatives. Minister, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you very much, Nigerians.
All right. I'm also here with Bello Kagara. He is immediate past Director of Social Mobilization of the Universal Basic Education Commission, UBEC. He's currently a consultant to UBEC. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stoba.
Right.
And then, good afternoon, Nigerians.
Okay. Right. We're also joined tonight on this discussion by Dr. Shehu Usman Mohammed Makarfi. He's Commissioner for Education, Kaduna State. He joins us from our Kaduna Network Center. I guess that the Commissioner can hear us loud and clear.
Very well. Good evening, and good evening, Nigerians.
All right. Thank you very much. And joining us via Zoom is Dr. Paul Igwe. He's a senior lecturer and regional academic lead, West East Africa University of Lincoln in the United Kingdom. He joins us via Zoom. Good evening.
Everyone, thank you. Yes, I'm glad to be here. Yes, so my pleasure, everyone.
All right. And also joining us via Zoom is Professor Peter Okebukola. He's President, Global University Network for Innovation Africa. Professor Okebukola, welcome to Tuesday Live.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. And, well, I'm sure by now you're acquainted with the procedure of NTA Tuesday Live. It's interactive, and so at the appropriate time, you can get to join in the discussion in the studio. The phone lines will be on your screens. You can take advantage of them. But let us all remind you of what to do at the appropriate time when the phone lines are displayed and you want to call in and be part of the discussion. We like to remind you of the rules. Once your call is passed through, go straight to the issues. Do not waste much time greeting everyone. It's not necessary. It's absolutely unnecessary to go ahead and spend time on greetings. Just go straight to the point, and always remember to turn down the volume of your TV set. That's the best way to avoid the hurlback or the echo. So once again, let me say welcome to NTA Tuesday Live. It's all about funding education in Nigeria. But let's start from the premise of turning to the Minister of State for Education, who's here, and start off by asking what the true situation of funding is in the education sector. Minister.
Thank you, sir. We all know how our country operates. It's a federal system, and all budgetary allocations must come from the National Assembly. We might stay in the National Assembly and understand that appropriation is a provision that's been made under Section 80 of our Constitution, and it is a requirement that whatever it is that the executive arm of government proposes to spend in relation to any sector of the economy would be appropriated accordingly. In pursuance of that, you have just simply given us what the 2021 figures are, and they represent slightly below 6% of total allocations. So that is the current funding situation, but that's also a carryover from many years. We inherited a system over time in when this democracy was born in 1999, in which there wasn't appropriation that was based on any National Assembly. It was essentially a military system of government, and allocations at those times were made semi-arbitrarily. And but a few things had been achieved. Some consensus around the education tax fund had already been achieved under the Babangida administration at the time, and under General Abacha's government, the codification of some of them as to what funding should be, especially the universal basic education sector. When we arrived in 1999, as the first set of legislators, we began work on what is now known as UBEC, the commission. And we concluded that work around 2003, and President Obasanjo signed it into law in 2004. So we now have a UBEC. The idea behind UBEC was to then consolidate a fixed income from aspect of the resources of the country towards addressing universal basic education. And we said 2% of total revenue accruing to the Consolidated Revenue Fund must be appropriated for UBEC, for Universal Basic Education Commission. So if you go into the law, we were very young at the time. We were young men in about 22 years ago, and we felt that really the way to go about this was to enforce it. We actually put in the law that we will arrest anybody whose child is not in school, and more or less that we'll have LEAs, because I'm sure you will see there are local education authorities that are supposedly going to arrest you. If you get a child who is out of school, they will go and arrest the father and the mother. And well, you know, we've evolved. Right. For many years of practicing this, we've seen that there is a limitation as to what we can actually do. We can't arrest everybody. We now have turned to almost urging parents and guardians to allow children go to school. So education funding, you will look at the main sources, taking money straight from the Consolidated Revenue Fund and giving to states for them to execute what they are supposed to do at the state level, because it's a subnational entity who is responsible for primary education, the way the concurrent legislative list in Nigeria has it today. Because when people say there needs to be devolution of power, the real power in Nigeria has already been devolved. The power to get somebody started and to manufacture the manpower that will drive this country has already been devolved to almost every local government. And that is been a burden, because the local government administration itself has not kicked in as to take on the burden, and the monies are just sent, and the government money is not spent as we think it should be. But there are other aspects of funding that just UBEC. There is state fund. There is the appropriations that go to the university themselves. There are internal generated revenue. There are a whole of government approach, because you can look at what you're spending in military schools, secondary schools, command centers, Ministry of Agri, forestry institutes, all kinds of institutes, fisheries. All of that is education. Okay. But when you look at just the portfolio of the Ministry of Education, you may then begin to look at the total result. For us at government, we like to look at a whole of government approach, and then we can isolate and stimulate them from each of the center points. That's what I think.
All right, that's okay. And well, you've just mentioned yourself that at certain tiers they've not really kicked in, and particularly the question of local government. We'll come to that, states and local governments. But again, let's talk to Bello Kagara, who's here, albeit he consults for one of the state actors in the fund of education. But give us a cursory look at what it is like.
You mean? What do you say, Siri?
Just give us a look at what funding is like. The minister has already spoken of
like the minister has, like the minister has said, funding in the education sector has really witnessed some strategic changes. With particular reference to basic education, I think when the administration of President Obasanjo launched the Universal Basic Education Program, there wasn't particular funding from the federal government. It was the World Bank fund or money loan that was being used to finance basic education. At that point, Universal Basic Education Commission, the entire program was being funded by a loan of $61 million, a credit loan under the Universal Basic Education Program, UBE Credit Support Project 2. Well, through the period of 1999, 2000, 2001, through even 2004, And the entire activities of the Universal Basic Education Program was being funded with that credit. Not until, like he said, in 2004, when the National Assembly promulgated, or rather passed a law, that 2% of the Nigerian consolidated revenue should be accrued or should be allocated to fund basic education. And since then, gradually the funding started with, I think it was about $22.3 billion in 2005. It grew to 24 billion, 222 million. Then by 2007, it drew back, or it dropped to about 17 billion. But gradually, I think by 2017, the funding rose to about 95 billion. Then thereafter, in 2018, the funding became 2009. From 2009, then in 2019, the money rose to 112 billion, Honorable Minister. But today, sorry to say, by year 2000, unfortunately, because of the COVID-19, and then the challenges that came with that COVID, the money dropped to 52 billion. But today, like he said, or like you rightly quoted, we have only, I'm using that fund in court, only 70 billion to run the huge programs and challenges that you have in the subsector.
All right, an important issue the Minister raised was the fact that at the local level, the local government level, things are yet to key into this proper funding of education. But let's go over to Kaduna State. Now, we have heard what the federal government has put into funding over time. Let's hear from a state government now as we link up with Dr. Shehu Usman Mohammed Makarfi, the Commissioner for Education, Kaduna State. Right, let's hear you, Commissioner.
In Kaduna State, I think from 2015 to date, the state government has been budgeting over 26% of its budget to education, except 1 year that we had 25%. Agreed, yes, 26.6 at one time, 28%. In 2019, it was 30%. This year, it is 26.6%. And I think budgeting for education or funding for education is not only state government affairs, just like the former speakers have rightly said. It's on the concurrent list. Everybody has a role to play. There is funding from federal government supporting basic education to support primary education. Local governments are also contributing because they also partake in payment of teachers. State government is contributing by building infrastructure, funding training, and so on and so forth. By and large, when you have this kind of arrangement, you find that if you put all the aggregate of the support to education, you find very many key players in the field. But again, it's still not enough. You still have a lot of gap left on field because the demand for education is so huge. No amount of money you are going to put in education that is going to be enough, particularly if you look at the demand from the sector. You need a lot of resources to maintain, to build new infrastructure, to maintain the existing ones, to buy and maintain furnitures, training, salaries, and so on and so forth. So it's a whole stakeholder issue. The private sector should come in. Government is contributing. Government at different levels, federal, state, and local governments, and so on and so forth, including, if you quantify what parents are contributing through out-of-pocket expenses, you put all together, you find that it's a huge amount of money. And the question is, how much is enough to fund education? You need to cost how much you need to educate a child at basic education, post-basic education, and tertiary education. It's only when you have this appropriate data that will be able to do justice when you are doing the budgeting for education at every level.
Very much, Dr. Showsman Mohammed Makarfi. Well, let's go over to London now and talk to Dr. Paul Igwe, who's the senior lecturer and regional academic lead of West East Africa University of Lincoln. He joins us via Zoom. Well, so far we've talked about state actors funding education. Give us the benefit of your experience, other sources of funding, non-state actors, for instance, in the funding of education.
Thank you again, viewers, and thank you, participants. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I would like to give a different perspective when we come to funding. By the way, just to put us into perspective, I am based in the UK in the higher education, but I'm also very active in the Nigerian higher education system. Most of my projects, I try to focus it on Nigerian higher education, to understand how things are going and ways of which the education sector has been making progress. And I want to say that I want to commend, government, efforts towards developing higher education in Nigeria. Yes, we might not be where we're supposed to be, but there has been progress because throughout my encounter and deliberations and also interactions with stakeholders in Nigeria concerning higher education, the overall consensus has been that Nigeria is making progress. Nigeria is also having or have a well established policies. But I will come to that. So, but when we talk about funding, I want to take it into or break it down into three perspectives where I would like us to look at it. So we can look at it from the point of the difference between public and private funding and the difference between federal and state funding of higher education. But also, I want us to look at it from affordability. And then in the third element that I always want to address this issue is looking at it from the sustainability. We are living in the 21st century where we know that we are talking about, sustainability of almost every facet of life, the social, economic spheres of life. So when we evaluate the higher education, funding from these three perspectives of differences in the funding, in the affordability of the funding, and the sustainability of the funding, then we can, we could make assessment. I am glad that His Excellency, the President of Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammad Buhari, highlighted the need to raise, the budget or spending of higher education. Because when you look at overall spending, both whether at the federal or the state, and even the international organizations that are involved in advancing funding in Nigeria, if you look at the spending of on higher education per student in the Nigerian perspective, then we have fallen short of economies that are within the bracket of Nigeria economic progress. But having said that, so maybe you come back to me. So when I want to look at those three areas, then I can now begin to think about, so what is the option? So
Okay.
I don't know if you are with me on that.
Right, Dr. Dr. Igwe, we're with you. You'll have more time to give us more details about that and look at the three sectors you mentioned in greater detail. But for now, we'll ask you to pause a while and let's go over to Professor Peter Okebukola, who is the President, Global University Network for Innovation Africa. Now, Professor Okebukola, you have the advantage of having been a state actor and you've also been in private education. I recall that at the time you were Executive Secretary of the National Universities Commission. So you're quite familiar with all these issues of funding in education. Give us your perspective.
Very much. Let me first congratulate our president for attending that Global Education Summit. If he didn't attend, the visibility that is being given to funding education in Nigeria today will have been dimmed. I'd like to thank Honorable Minister of State for Education. I saw him on Good Morning Nigeria the other day, I think today, and I was quite impressed with what he told us about the dividends of the London Summit. And you see, when my minister has spoken, I cannot speak again. So, Minister, but talking seriously, you know, our minister has looked at the funding issue from a lens focusing more on the different aspects of government. I'm going to look at it from, because there are several organizing schemes, I'm going to look at it from the lens of ownership. Now, you have publicly owned educational institutions, privately owned educational institutions. Let's take the public. The minister and the other members of the panel had given us deep insights, rich insights into this. Government at all levels. When I heard during the introduction that 5% or less than 6%, who has that figure? Who gave that figure? Because it's grossly inaccurate. You cannot just scheme the federal government allocation to education and take it to extrapolate it to the whole of Nigeria, knowing that we have institutions owned by state governments, like the minister said. We have institutions owned by the private sector. And when you add up all of this, the monies aggregate to a sizable sum beyond the 6% or 5-point-something% that's been banded. And who says there's anything like 26% of that UNESCO has prescribed for countries? That is a myth. It doesn't exist anywhere. My minister just came back from from the Global Education Summit. He will tell you that nobody outside Nigeria will talk about it 26%, but that's on the side. Now let's look at my own organizing scheme. You have government investing in education. You have public primary schools. You have public secondary schools. You have public universities owned by federal, state governments, local. And then the private. We have missed out that huge chunk. Let's start from the top. The private universities make up almost like 2/3 of the universities that we have in Nigeria today, even though they are not enrolling as many as the public, universities in the public sector. So you have a lot of funds invested by the public, by the private, in higher education. Let me take it beyond universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education. Now let's take the secondary schools. Come to Lagos, where I am. Huge private secondary schools. Go to Abuja, where you are, or Kaduna, or everywhere else. We are losing out. We are not factoring or summing up all of these investments by private secondary schools into the funding pot. And then let's go to primary schools. Primary schools everywhere, nursery schools everywhere, owned by the private. So when you take the contributions, financial contributions, looking at it from an organizing lens, as I said, ownership of the public and the private into education in Nigeria, it is sizable. Mind you, I have not said adequate, I say sizable, because as you introduced me to be the president of the Global University Network for Innovation Africa, GUNI was established as Global University Network for Innovation, was established by UNESCO in 1999. We started in 2000. Hours ago, to stimulate innovation in funding, innovation in delivery system all over Africa. And our studies on funding keep showing that Nigeria is not doing well, but it doesn't present the worst case scenario in the African continent. And as we progress, I can see that Dr. Paul Igbo is also nodding there. So if you look at our farm, you may wish to our funding farm. You will say, oh, this farm is the best or the worst in the world or in Africa or in West Africa. But one, by kind grace of God, has been able to see the farms in other places, the farm for funding in other places. And I know that we're not doing too badly, but for the region, Africa in total, the picture is not as, is not as good as the other regions of the world,
All right.
Europe, North America, and all of that. So I'm sure as the program progresses, we'll be able to break this down a little bit further. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Okebukala, yes, some might agree with you and say, well, we're not doing too badly. But again, against the backdrop that this country, Nigeria, is meant to be the giant of Africa. And like you also admitted, if we look at it from the regional basis, then the picture might not be too good. But then the London summit was offered a platform for more commitment to funding systems. And our own State House correspondent, Adamu Sambu, was at that summit, covering, of course, the president who led the Nigerian delegation. Let's get this report from Adamu Sambu on how it went.
The summit, co-hosted by the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Kenyan leader Uhuru Kenyatta, provides a key moment for the global community to come together and support quality teaching and learning for all children in line with the 5-year strategic plan of the Global Partnership for Education. The goal is to raise at least $5 billion towards supporting efforts at transforming education systems so that access and learning outcomes fit for the 21st century can be accelerated.
Some child somewhere may well be the one who goes on to develop the next vaccine to deal with cancer or whatever other problem afflicts humanity. Some kid around the world will, I have absolutely no doubt, have their lives transformed, and many, many kids will have their lives transformed by these funds.
Let us remember that even though money is necessary for transforming our education systems, it alone is not sufficient. A deliberate, committed drive towards ensuring that each dollar investment impacts quality and holistic education for our children is equally as vital.
Speaking during a panel session with other African leaders, President Muhammadu Buhari said neither the government nor parents in Nigeria joke with education.
Being over 200 million and the size of the country itself is a major challenge for any administration.
Absolutely.
But luckily, people have realized that education is a starting point.
Yes.
Anybody who missed the opportunity of receiving education, he has missed everything. Hence, the fight for opportunities for education is very, very severe.
At the summit, Nigeria lends its voice to the Raise Your Hand campaign on closing the financial gap for education, described as the heart of all national development efforts.
I assure you that Nigerians are acutely aware of the priorities of education. And they are going all out to make sure that their children and their wards get the opportunity to have the best of education.
Other members of the panel, including the presidents of Ghana, Togo, Kenya, and Malawi, spoke on the peculiarities of the education sector in their respective countries. President Muhammadu Buhari had earlier committed to raising the budget for education by 50% over the next 2 years and up to 100% by the year 2025.
All right, Adamu Sambu, our State House correspondent, reporting there. And of course, Minister, you were there yourself because you saw you in there. And speaking about peculiarities, the world did not envisage something called COVID-19. And that came and almost put a stop to virtually everything that was happening on a global level. COVID-19 hit hard at the schooling system, but how bad was it in Nigeria, Minister?
Well, just like you heard, nations also presented their perspectives. The global partnership is in reaction to gaps that there are. These gaps are a bit more exacerbated by the 2019 COVID outbreak. This pandemic took its toll on Nigeria, and like everything in Nigeria, quantifying it is in the size of Nigeria. When people last year, I think, were a bit worried when I insisted that we were going to go ahead with WAEC and reopen the schools for because I understood the gamut of problems that will encircle us if we do not take steps at the time to get some sort of resolution. And I'll give you some sort of idea. Last year alone, 1.5 million Nigerians took WAEC. When you hear about private schools, public schools, just the same way Professor Okemkola has explained, you will see that out of 28,000 secondary schools in Nigeria, this year we're going to have 19,800 of them taking WAEC. Now, if you sum up the rest of West Africa, because we're all in WAEC together, and if you sum up the rest of the schools, there are countries in West Africa whose total enrollment in WAEC is just 61,000. Total enrollment. Now, that is not, there are some states that surpass that in Nigeria. So that will give you the scale of the problem. So if COVID hit, it will hit us in the same proportion. And why is that? You will look at what it is that we reacted with. We reacted in a way to provide alternate learning platforms. And these alternate learning platforms, as developed by the Ministry of Education, was to open up a website where you could access every form of knowledge in the first 12 years of learning, which is from 1 to senior secondary 6. So, and everything will be available, the subject matter taught by good teachers. We received this sort of work plan, and we then disseminated it to all the states. Many states tuned in through radio channels that were local to them, and we then cascaded it to wherever the persons are. But we are also faced with the problem of platforms, because those who had platforms, be them radio, be them handheld devices, had also the challenge of maybe powering them. Where power wasn't an issue, you could get bandwidth issues. If bandwidth issues weren't it will be the availability of platform for multiple children. Because you see, in a household, there must be just one platform, and then that must be shared by different children who are in different classes. They will say, the way our families are organized. Nigeria is a huge country with a lot of sociological, sociocultural differences, and many of them, some parts of where the radio belongs to the father, and this radio is not for children to play with, So all of that came to play, and that's why you see Nigeria was hit hard. And all through last year, we kept appealing. When people hear me appealing, they heard me appealing to parents, as if the parents were the ones to go to the school, because the parents took up our role as teachers and educators at the point. They became facilitators. They became timekeepers. All the things we do in school, because you see, school is not really just about the book you read. There are sequences to it. The time frame, the fact that a child's cognitive ability and response time, how long a child in primary 1 can pay attention, the attention life span for a child in primary 1 is not the same as a child in primary 6. So we needed to keep parents in the loop, because parents were challenged. They were sitting at home, and children were locked up with them and managing them and food, everything at the same time. So it was a big challenge. So we thanked them. We coming out of it, we said we thank them. Again, we then looked at what it is we needed to deliver and how we measure what we have delivered, because students need to move on. You see, life does not wait when you're a child. The life of the child is paramount to us as government. The President Buhari government is a social democratic government in thinking. We are an APC government. We are progressives. So it was important to make sure that we do not, because of the favor of another person, stop another person. So we continue the cash transfers. We found ways to get to school feeding. You saw the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. She was almost killing herself, going from state to state, trying to deliver in the absence of anything to do. Because we knew that if we create a gap now, we're going to have to suffer these gaps later. And we kept forging that alliance, and God, you know, being so kind, we actually managed, we will say we didn't do too badly. Maybe we could give ourselves 90% of the marks there, because this year we're now beginning to see some fallout from what we didn't, all those that couldn't make it. We will have to find remedial substances, the manner of co-teaching them, what we call appraisal teaching, and what the ministry, I'm sure if you look at the ministry's website, you see what it is that we're doing for ameliorated studies and virtual learning, and all of those that will complement what people, the ministry also went ahead to look for private teachers, those who couldn't earn a living at the time, because we were concerned that we shouldn't lose teachers, because if for 1 year you don't pay anybody because you're private, and the private schools couldn't cope, because if they don't get fees from parents, they cannot sustain these teachers to pay. So we've got the Ministry of Trade and Investment, my friend Nia Debaya and the Minister Katagum, they came together, supported teachers as part of MSMEs. You know, it's a whole of government approach. You see, each time we think through these matters, we look at it as a Nigerian problem. And we're not looking at it that this is a state or is not a state actor or anything. So we brought everybody together to try to create that kind of, bandwidth around what we're doing.
All right. At this point, I'd like to skip over to Kaduna State and bring in the Kaduna State Commissioner for Education. Now, this because I'm looking at the scenario where a lot of places already had challenges with school enrollment, with retaining children of school age in school, and then COVID came and knocked out knocked off the school year system. I'm also looking at the rural areas, where if it was easy to address the issues in the urban centers, it would be twice more difficult in rural areas. So let's hear from the Kaduna State Commissioner for Education how COVID hit.
It was very hard. It was a very serious one. About 1.9 children going to nursery primary school in the state, we lost over 30% of them when we returned to school. In secondary school, the same thing, much more than that. I agree with you, more in the rural areas than in the urban centers, despite the fact that we have mounted serious e-learning programs. We engage all our radio and TV stations in the state. We open a lot of platforms. Our website was full of all the recordings we've done. We've aired over 50,000 recorded lessons through televisions and what have you, in our YouTube channels and so on. But again, the challenge is access of some of these media stations in our rural areas. Data was also a problem. You need to have an Android to access a lot of this information. You need to have a set of TV or a radio in the rural community. The assessment we made into the deep rural areas, we have to come back and look for stations that are even outside the state to engage to ensure that rural communities at the border are able to reach us and also be able to benefit from what we are doing. By and large, we learned to introduce the blended learning process in the state because we know life will not stop, nothing will stop, so learning must continue. We must do that to reduce the learning poverty in our institutions, and we were able to continue. But again, it's very important, it's a big lesson we learned through the hard way, because without COVID, we wouldn't have thought of doing a lot of things that we are doing now. We are ensuring that in all our schools, we have source of light that will power our systems and computers. We are supplying computers to the schools so that instead of buying hard textbooks, we are engaging the publishers to have the e-books to ensure that even if we have another pandemic, God forbid, we should be able to continue learning in our institutions at both primary and secondary schools. And again, the contribution of the community, parents and teachers and so on, was also so eminent. You cannot do that without them. Parents need to be engaged, sensitized, and educated to understand that without them, what the teacher was doing alone in school, now the parents have to now take some part of that responsibility to ensure that the child listen to the radio or listen to the watch the TV, do the assignment and return online. So teachers, I mean, now the functions of teaching and the role of teachers was much more appreciated by parents, because they realize that now, even though I'm at home, I still have to force this child to come and sit down and listen to what is happening. So then, when we open, parents were so happy to say that, look, I now understand that teachers are doing a great work, a great job. Because
in other words, the parents appreciated you more.
I mean, teachers are managing 20, 30, 40 in a classroom. It is still a challenge, but the key issue here is that we've learned a lesson to ensure that learning continues despite all odds. Number two, we've learned to use the radio and TV stations that before were only using for entertainment. We have used them to the fullest for educational reasons. We've learned to go back to e-learning process than to believe on only the hard books. We also learned to adopt the blended learning process in the state as a policy, so that even if there is anything again, we will reduce our expenditure on structure and providing classrooms. We are investing heavily now on ICT to ensure that children learn at home at all levels, despite all odds.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Back here in the studio here, Bello Kagara, you consult on basic education.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, COVID-19 was deadly.
Absolutely.
It almost put everything to standstill. But again, another aspect of it is that it helped us put on our thinking cap and brought out the best in our innovative thinking.
Yeah.
So how do you channel what you can, what you have grasped from this experience, into improving the quality of education?
Yeah, I think, Cyril, before I address that issue, I think we have to go back to the impact of COVID in the basic education area. You see, it is well known throughout the world that Nigeria houses the highest number of out-of-school children. The COVID-19 really, in basic education, it aggravates the challenge of basic education in the country. From the fact that Nigeria was housing about 10.1 million children, the COVID now sent back all children back home. And that then, like I was saying, aggravated a problem that all children are now back to their communities with parents. And then, like the Commissioner for Education is saying that parents assume the roles of teachers. But we found that in the rural communities, majority of the parents there are not educated. So the impact of COVID-19 to the basic education sector, as far as children were concerned, was that it increased redundancy of children, staying with nobody to attend to them. Teachers are separated from the children. Parents could not teach them. And as such, apart from redundancy, it turned the children into urchins. It turned them into doing menial jobs. It turned them into children who are being abused. It increases child abuse, that kind of thing. But then, from the UBEC perspective, what we did, or what was done by the commission then, and based on our advice, was that, like he said, we tried to now use the platform of e-learning to reach out to children in rural communities. I remember there was a time, even through the minister's effort, attempt was made to now use tablets, radios, to now send them to rural areas so that those could be channels and tools through which children in rural areas could be reached out. But in any case, the commission now, UBE, tried to think out of the box to now innovate and then introduce the open schooling program. It was a program that was run, and then some states were targeted so that school could be taken closer to the children through facilitators. We did that in conjunction with the State University Basic Education Boards, so that at least while the children are at home, through that approach, through that channel, learning could be effective, and then in that way, quality of education will be improved.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Paul Igwe, yes, a global pandemic, and all parts of the world had to come to terms with, children losing out and schools shutting down. Give us your experience on this and what the world can do in terms of putting in more to education, especially in the face of a pandemic. Because right now it's still not known when the world would surmount this huge health challenge. Every day we still hear about variants, and it's not yet over, and it doesn't look like it will be over anytime soon.
Yes, I like that the way you ended it, that the pandemic looks not yet over. Yes, even the World Health Organization acknowledges that we may have to live with COVID-19 for a very long time. But when you look at it, I like the perspective that the Honorable Minister for Education put together concerning their responses to COVID-19 when it was inevitable that, Nigeria having a huge population, also who are into primary and secondary school, needed to progress. If not, there would be like a congestion, if I use that word. So congestion and also exclusion, if you like, if I can borrow some words in that way. But when you look at COVID-19 impact as regards a developing country like Nigeria and advanced countries like the UK, you find that, or even maybe China and other places, you find the impacts are different, and also the consequences are different. So when in the case of Nigeria, talking about, for example, when I started earlier this evening, I thought about the difference in funding. So when I thought about that difference in funding, I was particularly referring, and I want to thank the Commissioner for Education in Kaduna State for highlighting the difference between rural and urban and city. So that was what I was also trying to allude when I was talking about the difference, in funding. When you look at our primary education, the standard in the rural area is different from the urban area, is different from the cities. If you look at the secondary education, in terms of the standard, is different in the rural, urban, and also even some universities who are located in the rural areas are having challenges like bandwidth, digitality, power, and all of this. So what I can say is that in as much as the current administration, because like I said, when I ran a project early this year to understand the progress being made in the education sector, particularly higher education sector, with stakeholders, everybody was in agreement that the government was embarking on policies which are really positively impacting on education. So, but the question that I always want to pose, and also not only me, but other stakeholders want to pose, is how sustainable in terms of long term is what are we doing now?
Right.
So what are we doing now? Is it a response to COVID-19? Is it a response to solving today's challenge? But how does that reflect into the sustainability of the education sector, maybe in 10 years' time or 20 years' time? That is where I also want to implore the Honorable Minister for Education, that, as long as they are currently dealing with what is at hand with the pandemic, as long as they're also reacting to some gaps that exist because of past policies in the education sector, but also because we are living in a global world that is very dynamic in the way it is changing. So we can begin to think about the sustainability of the policies.
Okay.
So that is where I want to stop, and then maybe
All right.
we can follow up with any other.
Okay, right. Well, we'll return to you, but then it would seem that the phone lines are already open, and So many people are willing to be part of this discussion. Let's hear from the first caller tonight. If you're still on the line, Daniel, who's calling in from... Yes, I don't think so. I don't think we can get that call through. Can we? No, we cannot. But we'll try that since the lines are open. But now's a... Yes. Now is the time for us to bring in Professor Kebukola once again, and it's just like Dr. Igwe said, now is the time to begin to look ahead and see how you can sustain what you've started and sustain the building of education in the face of a pandemic, which doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. Professor Kebukola.
Whoever knew that there would be COVID-19 when it hit? Nobody did. But like human nature, we responded. As I said, I have a network of, I chair a network Africa-wide, 54 countries. And during the period of the pandemic, we surveyed how countries were responding. And I'm so delighted to note that, you see, we had lockdown almost everywhere. Schools, children had to stay home, and teachers with capacity deficit in delivering virtual education, had to be, it's like dry fish. It's difficult to get it manipulated to be able to deliver what it is not programmed to deliver. So we had that all over Africa. But you see, when I listen to the presidential task force and I see a Minister of State for Education, respond on behalf of our sector, I usually feel very, very proud. Nigeria responded in a way that was unique. We did not allow the COVID-19, like I said, to hunker us down when the SSCE was to be on. So we had the policy came that, okay, now let's see how our students can get to do the examinations. And the policy regarding my subsector, that's the university subsector, was quite brilliant. My secretary, Professor Bakar Damorashid, passed the policy around the system, the subsystem, that look, vice chancellors, you got to start doing something in delivering quality education via online. And universities had a very slow start because we didn't have the infrastructure to deliver. I'd like to thank President Buhari and my minister, Madam Adamo, for asking that I should chair the National Open University of Nigeria. So we had a vantage position to help the universities to prepare. So talking about sustainability, we have been mounting programs that will help to build capacities of our university lecturers in delivering quality university education via open and distance learning. Indeed, Baba Rashid, as I call him, the Executive Secretary of National Universities Commission, only established about 3 months ago a virtual institute at NUC powered by the National Open University of Nigeria. So I'm talking about sustainability now, called the Virtual Institute for Capacity Building in Higher Education, VIGBE, which has started training our vice chancellors, our directors of quality assurance, our directors of academic planning, and accreditors, in this stage. So we got to put structures in place. But more importantly, we're discussing funding. The Prime Minister of Kenya said, funding is not all is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So if we can throw funds into the equation of this sustainability plan for to get COVID-19 to stay afloat, the pandemic impact, but we've got to ensure that capacities will have to be built, human and institutional capacities, through judicious use of the funds.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Kebukola. Do we still have Umar, right? I believe. Back to the phone lines. We have Umar calling in from Burning Kebi. Sounds like this regular caller on this program. Umar, are you there?
My name is Umar Anachi, calling from Burning Kebi.
Yes, I thought so too. Anachi, right.
I miss you on this program. Good evening.
Good evening.
I don't know. The minister has already tell us some benefit of attending the summit. But actually, the security issue is very, very important compared to the summit. I don't know if the minister can differentiate to us that the security of our schools is more important than the summit. Then my own opinion is that if the federal government wants to revitalize education, they should take over the whole primary education. It's one of the basic. The education should be run by federal government right from the primary school. That is my own opinion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, the minister's here. He's taking down that note to talk about the state of security in the schools. He will do that just after this break, because we'll take a short break now. Stay with us on NTA Tuesday Live. When we return, the minister will address the issue raised by Umar Anachi from Birnin Kebi.
Nigerian youths are about the greatest assets the country has at the moment. It is therefore not surprising that the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari is strategically responding to the yearnings of the youth through multiple projects and programs. Youth entrepreneurship support, yes, by Bank of Industry, the Youth Investment Fund by the CBN, and several other conditional cash transfer programs. Recruitment of 774,000 social workers, majority of whom are youths, and so many other projects that are beneficial to youths directly or indirectly. If the administration can do all this, definitely with a degree of patience and time, it can achieve more. Nigerian youths must come together to say no to terrorism, no to vandalism, and no to all disruptive tendencies. Hashtag Youth for Greater Nigeria. Pacifying the youths, unifying the nation.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Right, thanks for staying with us. For the break, Umar Anachi raised the issue of security of schools. Minister.
Thank you, and thank you, Umar, my brother in Kebi there. What he said is true. Well ahead of GPE, the Minister of Finance, who is the convening body for the Safe School Initiative, has convened the multi-sector dialogue, and we had a meeting at which ourselves and the security personnel, all the security chiefs, including the General Leo, who is the CDS, as well as the chiefs, all were in attendance. We sat with the Ministry of Interior, as led by the National Dr. Agye, who is the commander of the National Civil Defense Corps. Of all our schools, we have problems that are identifiable. But what has happened is that the Governors Forum and the National Council, which is a constitutional body, as governors, met. And we all agreed, even at that conference, that's a symposium, one day to look at what we need to make schools safe. Nigeria as a country has this challenge right now in the Northwest. Prior to this administration, it was in the Northeast, because you cannot operate a safe school in isolation. Safe school is an environmental issue. We can only govern the space within us. We can't govern the space outside. And most of the attacks on our schools stem from problems that have festered in society itself. And therefore, you will notice that before the Chibok attack, there had been ongoing Boko Haram activities in the area. By the time they got to Buniyaji, I mean, these were before 2015, before we came into power, before this administration came in. So when the Buhari administration came in, as part of its understanding of the landscape, it said, first things first, we need to tackle security. Security, our playbook for security at the time was to contain the country internally and prevent external aggression. When those that were defeated or more or less routed in the northeast migrated more or less in those who dispersed, and some of them found themselves in the northwest and entered the forest, because what some people may not know, but a large part of the forest in Nigeria is on the west flank. So from the whole of Benin, all the way from our borders with Niger Republic on the right and Benin Republic on this way, all the way down into Shiroro, into Niger State, are really heavy forests. And they took advantage of that. First, started out in Zamfara State, and then you heard there was kidnapping in Jengebi, before you got to Kagara in Katsina, not your own Kagara. In Niger. Got to Kagara, then got to Katsina, before we got down now to Birnin Yauri. Because in Birnin Yauri, where our schools, one of our schools were attacked, it's actually closer to Shiroro and Katangura end of Niger on the other side, because it's almost 4 hours driving out from Birnin Kebbi. So I understand what he's saying, and we are on top of this. We are disheartened by what is going on in that whole area, because if you try to meet the bandits halfway or pay ransom to take your children, you are in a double dilemma, because they will simply use the money to fortify themselves a little bit more and go and take a new school. Because if you see what has happened to us in Kaduna, from the forest school to where we are now with Baptist Secondary School to the Polytechnic, it seems something calculated within the city, just all around the city. So the governors have done a great job. The governors have done what we call a security audit of our schools. And they've decided, alongside us, and we are working with them on this initiative that I said, that the Gordon Brown Foundation had put up a £10 million provision earlier, before this administration came into being. And we are now looking at ourselves and the Ministry of Finance and our international partners to fund that. But we're going to be funding it only in respect of what the states say are their needs. Kaduna State, for instance, with 500 secondary schools, has a map of where schools are, where those that are at remote ends, where the army cannot respond in time. They've tried to bring those ones in and co-locate them with schools that are. We've also done that in some of the federal government colleges, co-location of schools. The way we experimented with Mongono and Maiduguri. Okay. So those are the kind of.
Yeah, we'll return to this issue, but back to the phone lines. There's a call from Kaduna now, and Solomon calling in from Kaduna. Hello, go ahead. No, I think that call is gone. I was just going to say before that call came in, Minister, that this does make it more difficult, or twice or even three times more difficult, to address the issue of funding and the issue of quality education, doesn't it?
It does. It's a huge challenge. The education sector now reflects the whole of Nigeria, because you see, everything when Dr. Kagara was explaining and McCarthy was explaining, Dr. McCarthy was explaining in Kaduna, all of them were alluding to what we are losing. We're already disadvantaged in the north. All the effort we've been making, and for the past 2 years, I'm almost in every state in the north trying to get best down, working, and suddenly COVID is hitting us from one side. As we are recovering from COVID, bandits coming into what we're doing. So I'm cross between running up and down every day trying to get everybody situated. So you're correct. It's a challenge. It's a double whammy from every side. We are being hit by the little number we are able to get to school. They are causing parents to lose even the small interest that we have generated in sending school, there are now people talking about being afraid to go to school.
All right, let's hope we can get this call through from Donald, who's calling in from Taraba. Hello, Donald. Donald, if you're there, I can actually hear the hurlback from your TV. So turn it down and go ahead with a question or comment.
Goes directly to the Honorable Commissioner. Yeah, my question goes to Honorable Commissioner of Education, Kaduna State. He was talking and made mention of computers being made available for the children in the town, and I did not hear what happened to the children in the rural areas, which means that only the children in the township are taken into more consideration than the children in the rural areas. So can you say much about that?
Okay. Well, I'm not quite sure because I didn't quite get the start of your question, but maybe Dr. Sheikh Usman Makarfi heard you. He might like to respond quickly to what you've raised.
Yes, I've heard her to some extent. I understand. You see, you need to start from somewhere. We cannot provide computers to every child in the 512 secondary schools in Kaduna State, but we can start from somewhere. So we have phased these institutions, these schools, into different batches. The first batch of all our boarding schools will be equipped with computers. At least a school will have an average of a ratio of 1 computer to 10 children, and all the systems will have all the e-books that we're using in our secondary schools. We've had consultants to do some survey for us to ensure that we have electricity, we have access to network, the school is secured, and not only secured in terms of fencing, observation posts, security personnel manning the school, and also to ensure that we have adequate teachers that will teach using the ICT equipment. We are all doing this in preparation to ensuring that we have a total holistic blended learning process to avoid the recurrence of what we've gone through COVID. When we are done with that, as of today we've received all the consignments of our systems, we'll go to the next stage. We'll do that gradually to the end, to the last school in the rural area. If we want to do it overnight at a time, that's not possible. We don't have the budget to do that. But again, we must do it. It's something that must be done. We must ensure that every child, regardless of the location of that child, access the same quality of education with the child in the city. Just last 2 weeks, we released a list of employment we have done for teachers. Over 7,600 teachers were employed to ensure that there is even distribution of these teachers from urban to rural. And we ensure that every child have access to this. So we cannot do that overnight to all the schools. But we said we must start somewhere, and we have started. This is because if we don't do this, at any future occurrence of this kind of pandemic, COVID or any other thing, the most hit student is the one in the rural community. And of course, the out-of-school children that we have today, we must bring those children that have gone back home during COVID back to school. And gradually, we are doing that. And I want to assure you that we've had framework agreements with network providers, with also some companies that will provide solar light to our institutions, so that every child will have that access like any other child in the city, so that tripping back to city for learning will reduce drastically. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Let's return to the fallout, the expected benefits of the global summit. Nigeria is one of those countries that will benefit from it. What exactly do we have out of that? That's the question most people would ask. That yes, we have gone. Yes, there's talk about $5 billion for 90 countries back on the local level, what's in it for Nigeria, Minister?
Well, we did get $125 million in grants promised to Nigeria. All thanks to the presence of our president. This is the highest Nigeria has ever gotten out of this meet. And we intend to plow them or plow this money into areas that are most, where we have the deepest gaps. We know that it is intended for us to address gaps. The national education policy itself is robust. We're doing everything that we can. I mean, you've heard from Professor Obukola right now, the kind of effort at the Nigerian Universities Commission. Those and what we can do as a nation, we're doing. I've just tried to explain to you that what we're going to do about safe schools and security. What we can do as a country, we're doing. But there are gaps. And this is where the money from GPE will be plowed into. I did point out that sometimes Nigerians may not even know where these gaps are. You will expect ordinarily that a state like Oyo State will not have any problem with out-of-school children. You will expect ordinarily that with the amount of work Kaduna State government is doing, they would have gotten the number of children all in. But it's not true. Every other place we still have. If you go to a place like Borno State, the governor has done tremendous work in the last 2 years of almost retooling schools. Even the Chibok school they said that has already been reopened. So it's almost like everybody is working hard, but we have gaps. And these monies will not just be thrown into the, money has come, let's share it. No. The monies will be used to address the gaps themselves. And the deepest gaps is where this will go to.
All right, let's go back to the phones. Kabiru from Abuja is on the line. Hello, Kabiru. Right, okay. That has not gone through. But, yes, Belukagara.
Yeah.
Yes. The minister talked about gaps, specific gaps, which, what's going to come in will go towards plugging.
Yeah, like several other speakers have really thanked the Mr. President on the promise he made on increased funding up to 100 in the next few years. We in the UB subsector are really appreciative of that. But certainly the benefit that will accrue to education generally, not only basic education, is that with more funding, certainly there will be increased access to education at all levels, at all strata. There will be increased equity across all strata, across all facets of communities. And then there will be increased quality. Because like the President said, at individual level, the personnel of an individual does not go beyond the level of his education. Similarly, it's an agenda that no country's development goes beyond its education development. Okay. In that regard, what I'm saying is that with more increased funding, certainly the level of education delivery in the country will increase tremendously across all across all facets of the Nigerian education sector.
All right. Yeah. Emmanuel from Abuja, hello, you're on the line. Yes, Emmanuel, are you still there with us?
Hello, good evening. I'm glad to speak with you. Good evening, all Tuesday Live. I'm an educational consultant. Besides the issue of funding, I want to respond to the issue of literacy and manpower. You see, the literacy and manpower gap in the country is very, very low when it comes to education. And that is because the curriculum is in line with the British colonial curriculum, where emphasis is laid on literacy rather than technical development. Currently, we need to make more investment in technical schools. We have 774 local governments in Nigeria, and the technical schools, including institutions of technology, are less than 150. I think currently we have 110 or so technical institutions. So, and this is giving us the problem of losing manpower to foreign nations. Nigeria is currently losing about 1 trillion naira annually to foreign countries in the educational sector. It's a huge manpower loss and financial loss to the country. So while we are making efforts to develop our educational system, let us also make efforts to ensure that we develop our manpower and bridge the literacy gap. Teacher motivation must be very, very important. Teacher motivation is very, very important because I am a teacher now, and teachers are not adequately motivated in the country. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll take something out of that and take it all the way to the UK as we return to Dr. Paul Igwe, and seeing that the effort is on to commit to increased funding so you can get better quality education, and seeing that there are countries whose challenges, would seem to be worse than other parts of the world. Now, taken from what the last speaker who called on the line talked about capacity building and the illusion that a country like Nigeria still has its education system steeped in the colonial system. I would like you to address that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is really very interesting question and also contribution from the last caller.
All right. Dr. Paul Igwe, we'll return to you later on. It seems that your audio is a little bit distorted, so we'll come back to you. Let's see if we can get it clearer with Professor Peter Okebukola. Nah, we'll have some challenges with that. But, well, we'll bring the issue straight to the minister here. You heard Emmanuel, who called in from Abuja. He talked about paying attention to capacity building for teachers. He also talked about the education system, one that provides skills that will empower those who've passed through the system rather than the certificates that will take them nowhere.
What he has said is the truth. Government is already on top of all of this. TVET, the government has pivoted towards TVET already, and STEM education. Everybody is aware. Curriculum has been altered. Professor Jinadu, the head of NAIDC, they've just produced a new template for curriculum development, which we approved in Port Harcourt at the National Education Council last year. We're refocusing, and you know the federal government has just created more federal science and technical colleges, and we've urged states to also do the same, and they're doing that. In Imo State, for instance, the governor is expanding on all of that. In Borno State, the governor is also expanding on all of that. So that effort is on. He's correct. There is an increased effort to try to enable Nigerians work or produce the kind of manpower the country needs. We will. We also think about to do a labor audit, a manpower audit in the country, because you see the kind of effort the Minister of Communications is making, going around the country creating these new digital hubs and so on and so forth. But we need to situate that into a national plan. And that national plan can only be addressed when the Ministry of Labour finishes the national manpower labor audit. In other words, let us know what kind of gaps we have and those we are training for work. We're losing a lot of manpower. He's correct. I mean, if you look at the number of, I address doctors today in my office, and I try to explain to them that we train people for very next to free in Nigeria, and as soon as we finish training doctors, they get the best offers they can get out of the country, and they're gone, and every other person is using them, and we're not. So he's correct, but we're addressing that. Part of what this GPE fund will also do would be to help us pivot towards TVET, the way we also have envisaged it. We are working with the NBTE, the National Board for Technical Education, to expand their curriculum and see how many more licenses will be issued to what we call pre-qualification standards around the country. In other words, in collaboration with the labor workforce. There are almost 600 institutions around that in the country where you can get your QVS light certification for any of the skills. NTA is one of them. NTA is already a technical school at Jos, and your certificate is also recognized by us. And so that's what Professor Kebugola was reechoing from what I had said about the whole of government approach to education. All of this is education, and we're training people from different skills. And there are lots of such institutions that we've asked MBTE to regulate and control what they produce. Well, he's correct. The manpower needs of the country, we are gradually retooling them to be responsive so that our education is responsive to our own manpower. Right. We're doing that.
Okay. Akinola from Ilorin, if you're there, go ahead.
Good evening.
Yes, Akinola, go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Akinola from Ilorin, Kwara State.
Okay.
Yes, my contribution this evening. I want to appreciate the various contributors in the studio. But I want to advise, government is trying in the area of infrastructure in our nation's schools. Particularly, even test fund is also trying in our institutions. But I want to appeal to government to please not to pay lip services to education something in Nigeria. Like the UBEC you are talking of, UBEC seems to concentrate on award of contract too much than providing manpower, capable manpower that can impart knowledge on the students. Because then on the part of my institution, where I said political will is very essential, in the sense that there are a lot of incessant strikes in this country, which is going to be of immense value to our graduates. You discover that most of our graduates are not employable. It's because when they go on strike, by the time they resume to go and have their examination. So it's not very unfair, and I'm happy that the Honorable Minister is there. When you look at most of the problems when there are strikes here and there, we discover that the government did not honor their own part of agreement, which is not fair. So there are a lot of important strikes here. And again, policy somersault, I expected people to have mentioned about policy somersault. But nobody is talking about it in the studio right now. In the first instance, I wonder why the technical colleges and the teacher colleges were abolished. I wonder what was the focus of those who abolished the technical college that we have in Nigeria.
All right. Okay.
My own father was a principal, teacher training college principal in Zamfara. And some of our students have mentioned last year that they are going to introduce a teacher's college. Because when you notice, teachers as a profession in Nigeria, people are taking it not as a passion. They are only taking it as a stepping stone before they could get other lucrative jobs. So I want to advise government that they should have the lack of political will and policy somersault as responsible for most of our problems.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, it takes us back to the old saying that the teacher's reward is in heaven, but now it has to be right here.
Yeah.
Good.
I think let's go back to the issue of relevance and skill acquisition, which is very, very central to refocus the Nigerian education system into that direction. You see, why we are happy with the president's proclamation on the increased funding is that if adequate funding now comes in sufficiency, like I said before, the issue of access will be addressed, where more children, more learners will now have access to education. But at the same time, the issue of quality will be addressed in such a way that, let me just give an example of what UBEC is now doing. There's a program now currently being in place or put in place by the Commission, by the Universal Basic Education Commission, on effective school program, where schools will be supported to now achieve the minimum standard and then gradually be moved to position of effectiveness and excellence. How do I mean? In that platform or in that program, learners will be directed towards productivity, innovation, and anything that has to do with excellence production. Nigeria today, not even Nigeria, the world is now being driven by knowledge economy and is being driven by ICT. To move Nigeria's education system towards meeting its national development needs, issue of ICT has to be factored. And that program is now being, or is taking that issue into consideration. So I think one way of improving relevance of education is to improve its quality, so that stakeholder perspective in terms of operation will be increased. The moment the stakeholders, especially parents, have confidence in the education system, I think learning and access will be improved.
All right, thank you. Looks like we have Dr. Kebukola back with us via Zoom. We do? Right, so yes, Dr. Kebukola, glad that you're back with us. We started talking about the quality of, the capacity of the teaching personnel. We also talked about the system and, of course, the curriculum. As you may have heard us say, we couldn't link up with you to get your thoughts on those. The curriculum, the school curriculum, and some caller raised the issue of the system still being tied to the colonial system. Would like your input on that.
Thank you very much. I think all of these that you mentioned are overlaid by the fact made earlier that, oh yes, we're expecting some money. How do we spend the money? I like to follow, there's a game we call Follow the Leader, which I like very much. But I like to follow the good leader. And when I heard the Minister of State say just now that they're going to look for where the shoe pinches the most. So it's not a question for us to sit here to say, oh yes, we're going to apply to, you see, there are the following areas, following clusters in education. You have access, you have quality, you have relevance, you have equity, and you have effectiveness, efficiency and effectiveness. So what the minister has said, and I'd like to follow him as a leader, that the Federal Minister of Education, along with the other stakeholders, in say the National Council on Education, will now determine where the shoe pinches the most. Where is the depth? Where do we have challenges, the deepest challenges with access? Where do we have the deepest challenges with quality, with relevance, with equity, and all of that? So it has to be quantitative. It has to be empirically driven. So I'm quite happy that that is going to happen. Not that you just have some money and they just throw it anywhere. That's what the minister is telling us, that that's not going to happen. Relating to the colonial tie to the UK, we are saying that that is fading, and it's fading very fast. You're talking about the curriculum. If you look at the curriculum at the secondary level, if you like, basic education level, and at the higher education level, it's not tied to, let's even take the higher education level, where I say my tent is pitched. It's not tied to any British, any colonial master. It is actually, it's a hybrid between what we have in the US, what we have at US, not our colonial master, what we have in elsewhere in the world. And as I speak, the National Universities Commission under Professor Abubakar Damura is about concluding the complete overhaul, started about 2 years ago, complete overhaul of the curriculum of the Nigerian university system. So in a little while, we're going to be, out of the woods, more or less, in that area. Now, about capacity of teachers. I did say earlier that NUC has established a virtual institute for capacity building in higher education. And we're training our teachers, in this case, the lecturers in the universities. We're training the administrators, training everybody. So capacity is being built and developed. So I don't want to paint a very rosy scenario, knowing that we are still far from where we should be, but I'd like to let Nigerians know that we are not just marking time. We are inching our way forward little by little. And so when the money comes, I'd like to thank the Minister of State for Education that it is going to be one that all the stakeholders will be part of, and you're going to find out where you need to apply the money, not just conjecturally, but empirically. Do some studies that will say, okay, fine, we need to apply this in the area of access, in the area of quality, in the area of relevance, equity, efficiency, and effectiveness. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's see if we can reconnect with Dr. Paul Igwe now. I suppose we can do that right away, since, yes.
For having me back. Yes, I'm glad that the last caller touched about decolonizing the curriculum and decolonizing education system. Yes, Professor Okembola also highlighted on that fact that much as the efforts that have been put in place or changes that have undergone or been taken in the area of the curriculum to decolonize it. But I would rather say, rather than decolonization, because I'm working on a project. My university in the UK is one of the universities that my vice chancellor is keen on decolonizing the higher education. So I'm very much on that project. But when I take the decolonization agenda or cause to Nigerian education, I think there are more avenues where we can decolonize, even the funding system. We can decolonize the funding system. We can also decolonize the gaps that the Honorable Minister talked about. For example, I have always mentioned the system in Nigeria. Do we pay attention to special schools? Do we give attention to population of the needy, inclusivity, like gender? So these are where the colonial system do not allow, because it's built on a platform where everybody has to pass through the same system. So, but we can decolonize, the system by having, okay, for example, there can be, in many countries, like if you go to China or Singapore, you can see there are different arrangements of the schooling system. So it's not only the one built upon C334 system or primary, secondary, university system. There are different ways to learn. So learning can be decolonized. So, and you can only do that by decolonizing the curriculum. I agree with the caller. So what I would, when we look at these issues and the way that the education system is structured, then I still, that takes me back to talking about the sustainability in the way that it addresses the unique problems, the unique challenges that Nigeria, as a developing country, given, like earlier on, we talked about security issue, given the difference in the rural, urban cities, given the difference even in access to education. When you look at the northeast, northwest, or south, or eastern Nigeria, you have that each of these regions have different peculiarity or different challenges. So we need to look at this holistically to think about how funding can be appropriated to mitigate most of these challenges. So that is what I would like to put in this discussion. And also I want to propose to the Honorable Minister for Education, this Professor Wajova, that if you would, I also want to, propose that the idea of decolonization also be part of your ministry program. I'm quite happy to lend, some of the areas of the work we have done with decolonization and see how we can take this to education in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. And before the minister comments on that, let's go over to Kaduna. And again, you've heard the minister say it's not going to be a situation where we throw money at everything simply because you're getting funding. But that it will be targeted at specific areas of need. And of course, all around, there are areas of need which the other units that make up the country would have identified, and Kaduna not being the list of them. So let's hear your views on those, as well as the question of qualitative education coming through with the capacity of the teachers and the acquisition of skills.
Yeah, thank you. It is not, when you look at all the components that make up a budget for education, you see that the issue of manpower development is there, infrastructure development is there, and so on and so forth. In Kaduna State, we are heavily investing on improving the quality of human resource that are in the education sector with a lot of incentives and motivation to let them do better. Like I said some minutes ago that 2 weeks ago we just released the employment of 7,600 teachers. It was need-based. We did our assessment to know how many teachers do we need to inject into the system to address the shortages and the gaps existing. Secondly, our focus is to ensure that we entrench blended learning in our system to make sure that at all costs, at any time, learning continue whenever we have any problem. Thirdly, we are looking at a sustainable system of funding what we are doing from our own end, and also mobilizing the private sector and the communities also to contribute in funding education. We just looked at a process where we are sensitizing the school-based management committees and PTAs to take responsibility for what is possible in managing education, while government will be holistically looking at a component of that, and that we are deliberating, discussing with the different stakeholders. We are also looking at new innovations, innovative ways of funding education. Even to sustain what we have, let me give an example. When I made my budget estimate for 2021, I demanded for over 100 billion naira from the Kaduna State government, which is not possible out of the over 200 billion naira budget. What I got was 26.6%. But again, to sustain that, we need to ensure that we sustain our internal generated revenue. We need to sustain or improve what we are getting from everywhere, either from federal government or from internal generated revenue. Anything short, from what we are getting will actually affect a child, either in the urban center or in the rural area, because some of the things we are promised to provide will not be able to provide it. So we need to sustain the funding. And of course, while doing that, we need to innovate different ways of funding our education system in the state. Yes, the challenge of insecurity has been there. You need to have fund to ensure that these schools are secured. The safe schools system, which the federal government and Federal Ministry of Education has called upon us to adopt, we've done that, and we're ensuring that parents are contributing. Right now, as we speak, we're in NICO. Even today, we had stakeholders review meeting to review where we have clustered our students to sit down and write NICO with NICO officials, with community leaders, PTA, security teams, and what have you. And they're writing their exam score. So we want to continue that to make sure that we want to inject the culture of everybody has a role to play in ensuring that qualitative education is provided. And I want to use this opportunity to call on federal government, particularly Federal Ministry of Education, to look at how do we fill that gap of funding the JS 1, 2, 3 salary. Teachers currently in primary school are being paid by local governments, but SUBEB is responsible for basic education, complete basic education, the 12-year education, the 9-year education. You find that there's discussion between local governments and states about who funds totally or in parts the salary of teachers that are teaching in junior secondary schools. That's number one. Number two, I will commend the Federal Ministry of Education for establishing the Commission for Management of Secondary Education, and I want this to be fast-tracked so that we can also enjoy what others are enjoying in basic education and tertiary education through TED Fund. Again, let us develop a framework collectively that will ensure that funding for education is not only sustained, but new innovations are introduced to sustain funding in education. Anything short of what we are providing will affect the delivery, will affect the quality, will affect somebody somewhere. And of course, the person that's going to be affected might be somebody who God has destined that's going to be a commissioner, a minister, a governor, or what have you. So will actually bring somebody who may not be able to do or discharge his duty responsibly. In my final note on this, I want to ensure that quality education as we speak, you cannot do that without quality teachers. Teachers are very critical and very important. So we need to develop a comprehensive process of ensuring that we provide adequate number of teachers in our institutions. Motivation in terms of ensuring that their salary is better than elsewhere, or else our schools and education will remain, a conduit pipe. You employ somebody today, after 2 years, he gets employment and leave you. And you need to employ somebody and restart the training again. And this will not augur well to our education system. The best are supposed to remain in the education system. The best of us are supposed to remain as teachers in our primary, secondary, and our universities. That's not what we are getting today.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And as we prepare to wind down, Minister, the next couple of questions, of course, would come to you. Yes, government has put in place measures that are beginning to lift the morale of teachers and addressing certain aspects that have driven people away from the teaching profession and attracted only those who use it as a stopgap to greater things. But there's still a lot more to be done.
Yes, this government already has gone ahead to say, well, we're going to, first of all, take in the best, because we want the best persons. And in order to attract them, we're making the conditions of service a bit more favorable. We're going to allow teachers teach up to 65 years. That's an extension that's not available to other people in other professions. We're also going to allow them stay in service for almost 40 years. That's also not available in any other profession. Why this is all going, we want to be able to recruit those who are actually people who would want to stay in the profession, because this is the profession that should offer Nigeria the best. And this is a decision that has already been taken. Federal government already taken a decision on it. The bill for it has already been sent to the National Assembly. They're in the process of making that, turning it into law. We know the economic challenges in the country. The economic challenges actually encompass everybody. It is not peculiar to the teaching profession. But this government did say that in the first part of its administration, that we will stop non-professional teachers from teaching as at 2019, the end of December, and that we have done. The teaching TRC Professor Ajiboye's and his group have gone to town. We've re-evaluated teachers. We've calibrated how they are absorbed into the system. We've also given teachers a pipeline for career progression. The NTA is supporting with UBEC, and they're all putting hands together to retrain teachers. So a lot has been going on in the teaching profession that's now made the teaching profession actually a bit more wholesome. It's not Uhuru yet. We've not achieved everything we want to do with the teaching profession, but we're getting there. Now we have enough persons reacting, and we need states to act like other states. You know, when Kwara State started the idea of evaluating the qualification of their teachers, they were met by a brick. There was a lot of pushback. Oshomole, in the days of being governor in Edo State, also got some pushback. I'm sure you heard El-Rufai in Kaduna also had pushback when he tried to rework the way teachers are absorbed. Because teachers are at the heart of a school. It doesn't matter all the things that we build all the numbers of things. If even Professor Bukola said, now even at the level of the Universities Commission, we've opened a virtual learning center for teachers to be taught. They are called lecturers at that level, but at that level, every part of it, we are saying the quality of those who program our children ought to improve, because teachers themselves are programmers. So we must, by our own nature, configure them to be adequate for our system and to be able to then give us the best. Yeah.
On a final note, Minister, there are distortions in the system which affect the quality of education. The funding you talked about, it's all towards making education better and more functional. But then there are distortions. Sometimes you deal with labor issues which distort the system. You had to deal with COVID, you had to deal with insecurity, but you also have to deal with labor issues. And people say, what is the thinking of this government to address or to be proactive, to identify these areas that are likely to lead to conflicts and industrial unrest in the education sector, and to nip it in the bud before it leads to disruption of the school system and the stability of policies, and of course certain agencies of education, tenure and things like that are always, sore points when they come up. Of course, the latest, of course, being the expiration of the tenures of certain chief executives of certain education agencies. A vacuum in those places might affect education. What are your comments on that?
First of all, this is why there is a government. It's our job to manage this, because human beings are sociological beings. We are who are and how we are socialized. And so it is our job. That's why governments get recruited every 4 years or 8 years, as the case may be. We are fortunate to be in power at the moment. President Muhammad Buhari ran on the understanding that Nigerians have given this mandate to manage their affairs. And that's what he's doing. And that is why these challenges, when they come up, whether they be strikes, whether they be COVID, whether they be any kind of, whether they are natural or man-made or any kind, it is our job to manage it. And this is why we're here. This is almost going to 1 a.m. in the morning. It's our job to be managing the country. It's our job to be recruited. We've been recruited to do this. So whatever the challenges are, whether they be strikes, for instance, ASU is legitimately asking for a couple of things. We're just going to juxtapose that as alongside what Nigeria can afford. But that does not make them wrong or make the government wrong. What it does is a managerial, man aging, and we are all agents of management. That's all we're doing. And that's what we must do. And we must do this with the consciousness that we are all Nigerians. Nobody is more Nigerian than the other. For me, we are patriotic citizens trying to drive a process. And we must get everybody on board. I know it's difficult because many people may not believe us, or maybe people will not like our style. But the fact that you don't does not disqualify what we're doing. We will keep doing it, and we'll try to make sure that it bodes well for everybody. When vacancies occur in government parastatals or any, because some of them are tenured by law. If the places where we can reappoint, we reappoint. Those who we believe that have done very well, or if there's correction to be made, they make the corrections. That's the reason why we are in government. It's our job to take responsibility for all of that. That's everything. When I started with a historical review of where we are and how we met it, and I admitted that some of the decisions we took as young men, now that 22 years later, we're reviewing them and seeing what works in line with that. And that's how life must go on, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
So this is where we must leave this conversation. There'll be lots of other times to explore further the improvement in the quality of the education funding and quality as well. But we must leave the discussion here tonight. So I'd like to thank all our guests. Let's start off by saying a big thank you to Dr. Paul Igwe, Senior Lecturer and Regional Academic Lead, West East Africa University of Lincoln, the United Kingdom, who joined us via Zoom. Thank you so much, Dr. Igwe, for being part of this discussion.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all the participants and everyone that's listening to the program.
All right, thank you. Let's go back to Kaduna, our network center in Kaduna, and say thank you to Dr. Shehu Usman Mohammed Makarfi, Commissioner for Education, Kaduna State. Thank you for being part of this discussion.
Very much. Thank you for having me.
All right, and now to Professor Peter Okebukola, President, Global University Network for Innovation Africa. We also join us via Zoom. Professor Okebukola, it's always a delight talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being part of this program. Thank you.
And thank you too to Will Lukagara, Immediate Past Director of Social Mobilization, UBEC, a consultant to UBEC. Thank you for being part of this discussion.
Thank you very much, Cyril. Thank you very much, all Nigerians.
All right. Yeah. And the Honorable Chukwuemeka Nwajuba, Minister of State Education. Thank you, and yes, it's been a long, a long day for you. But like you said, that's why you're here.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Mr. Steven, and thank you, fellow Nigerians.
Thank you very much
for the opportunity to serve.
Yeah. All right, and so thank you too for being part of this discussion, and those who call in, those who tried to call in but unfortunately couldn't get through. We also thank you. Keep the effort up, and this is where we say we'll see you again next week on NTA Tuesday Live. I'm Cyril Stober. Continue to stay safe.